In the year 2016, there were 528 reported sexual offences, 118 of which were rape. This makes rape 22% of all sexual offences in that year alone. In the last 5 years, 1,194 cases of rape were reported in Trinidad and Tobago.
Sexual assault has a wide range of effects. So very often people may feel very helpless, unable to stop something dreadful from happening. They may feel a lot of horror about what has happened. People can feel quite shocked for quite a while because it just disbelief that this has happened to them. And then they need to start negotiating, I guess, a new identity for themselves and perhaps a new future. Very often you see yourself differently, you start seeing your future differently, what you're able to achieve and not in some cases. Very often people may feel guilty that this hasn't happened to them. They may blame themselves, and I think people are very much meaning makers. So if something happens, you very much trying to make the meaning and understanding, why did this happen to me? How might I have contributed to it? So there's a lot of self-blame involved sometimes too, and then the guilt that may go with it. But people may also feel very angry, be full of rage, either towards the attacker or towards other people who they believe should have been able to help. So if, for example, a young person is raped within the home, I guess there's a fantasy that parents should have been able to protect them and keep them safe. So people can sometimes spend a lot of time with sort of fantasies of revenge to try and right the wrong that happened to them. So there can be a great sense of betrayal as well, because we know that a lot of rape and sexual assault happens from someone that you know. So it might be a family member, it might be someone you're in a relationship with. So there could be a deep sense of betrayal, and then you're left with a lot of difficulty trusting people, or trusting yourself, because it's kind of like, why didn't I see this coming, or I should have known. And so I think that it's very difficult then to learn to trust your own instinct for knowing, who's safe and who isn't.
Rape tends to be a heart-rending experience, particularly when the perpetrator has a close relationship with or is known to the survivor. In these instances, betrayal of trust is a prevailing theme reported by survivors. The traumatic and intrinsically personal nature of rape makes disclosure quite difficult.
I was 7. It was with my uncle. Wasn't sure about what was happening, but eventually understood what happened, and I was a little girl, and it was an uncle that I considered my favorite uncle. I trusted him a lot, and unfortunately it happened during a family get-together. I didn't tell anybody, because he asked me not to tell anybody, and I think up to this day he actually thinks I've probably forgotten about it, and that I just think it was a dream or something along that lines. But I remember everything, down to what I wore, to my shoes, exactly what led up to it. I remember every detail of it.
I was 14 years. I was about to turn 15, and yes, I knew the person. He was actually my neighbor, and he had free access to our house because families were close. One day he was pressuring me about who my crushes are, the things that older brothers ask their younger sister. And I secretly had a crush on him because I always liked older men, but because I knew it would be inappropriate, I never told him. I ended up telling him, and after that he started treating me completely different. He started talking to me about sex, and I kept telling him that I wasn't ready yet to have sex. One day he came over to my house, and I was in my room. He came into my room and forced me onto the bed, and I kept saying no, I don't want to, and he kept telling me that it was going to be okay. He kept telling me that I was his, and he forced himself onto me. As he was in the act, I started crying. He looked at me and he said that I am his and I can't have sex with anyone else. And he left.
I was about 5 or 6 years old, and one day my brother came into my room. Well, it was a shared room. I'd have my bed and he'd have his. I was laying down in bed after school, and then he came and he put his arms around me. And after a while, he put his hand down my pants, and I knew that was wrong, but at the time, well, I didn't know anything about rape. I just knew it felt wrong. It happened again, a couple more times actually, and then I reached a point where I would tell my mother, and she was shocked. She didn't know what to say. She then told my father, and what they told me was that I shouldn't go and tell people this, but they were glad that I told them, and they told me that they would handle it. And it happened again. I told them again, and they kept on telling me that they would handle it. They ended up separating us, and each of us got our own rooms, but I still felt insanely unsafe around them because he would do this thing to me that I didn't like. So I reached a point where I couldn't even talk to him. Like, we went from being best friends one day to passing each other straight in our own house.
In the aftermath of the sexual assault or rape, people can become quite depressed because they're coming to terms with what's happened and what it means to them and their future. And of course, a lot of the meaning we make and how we feel about it depends on some of the details. So for example, if you told people what had happened to you and either been maybe not believed or worse, judged for it or dismissed in some way, then obviously that can compound people's negative ideas and feelings about it.
It really, really affects me. I get scared. A lot of times I get up at night and I'm just crying. As a little girl growing up like that, everybody, they didn't understand why I wanted to be a guy so much. And before I used to wear, dresses, I was running into my mother's makeup bag and wearing high heels, and after it happened, I just gave it all up. I became one of the boys because in my mind, these things don't happen to boys.
That night, I felt really, really horrible. And I felt like I wasn't worth anything anymore. Every day, it was a struggle. I didn't have much people to confide in. I didn't tell my parents. During the years after the incident occurred, when people asked me if I was a virgin, it was like the biggest battle of my life, like in my mind, because All I could think of is that I don't want to tell people I'm not a virgin because they would think that I had consensual sex. But if I say that I'm not, you know, it was really complicated for me.
The fact that it was somebody so close to me, it was my brother, that kind of added to it in a sense, because if somebody that close could like betray you in that way, then what does that say for everybody else? I mean, if it had happened like with a stranger, I feel like it still would have been extremely traumatic, but I feel like as it's in the home itself, makes nowhere safe. Like, and nobody should have to feel unsafe, especially in their own home. Even afterwards, like, I wasn't close with him, and my relationship with my parents was also kind of rocky. It made me feel kind of unsafe, especially around him, and like in my own house, I felt unsafe, and I don't believe anybody should have to go through that. Like, they were supposed to protect me, and I feel like they didn't. Well, with my father, I think it was because he was the pastor of a church. It would kind of affect the image, because people already think badly of church people. And with my mother, like, I feel like it's a kind of tough situation for her, because it's one of your sons that you love hurting another son that you love. So what do you even do then?
In the aftermath of any trauma, there are some people who be like, you need to talk it out, talk about it, talk about it, talk about it. And I think for some people who aren't ready to talk, being pushed to talk cannot be helpful. On the other side, there are some people who perhaps need a little encouragement to talk and also need to be reassured that people do want to hear. So for example, some people may be under a lot of pressure to be okay. And so what I hear sometimes is I don't tell anybody in my family or amongst my friends because they all expect me to be over it by now. Or if I talk about it or seem upset, the people who care about me get really upset. So very often people mask their distress. So I think reassurance that, hey, I'm here for you if you want to talk, I'm ready to listen, would be helpful. And not just saying it once and assuming that 6 months later the person still feels comfortable, right? The other option is actually to see a professional, a counselor or a therapist. Sometimes people prefer to talk to someone outside of their life. It's professional, it's confidential, and they don't feel like they're burdening anybody at home. So that's always an option. But I think that talking about it can be a very beneficial first step to trying to evolve that meaning that we made in the first instance, and also, importantly, to focus on how we cope in the aftermath of trauma. Remember that with rape, there's so much shame about it in our society and many societies that it can make it very difficult to talk about something like that. So when people come for therapy, for example, it may well be that we talk around a lot of things and actually don't talk about the rape for a good few sessions. So people kind of, ease in, get more comfortable. So therapy certainly goes at the individual's pace, and then really people talk about it when they're good and ready, and not a minute before.
Telling your story would be able to help someone else, because a lot of the times you feel alone in these situations. But I have spoken to my friends after a couple of years about the situation, and I realized that I wasn't the only one. And the fact that I wasn't the only one that this happened to, well, for one, it opened my eyes to the kind of epidemic that is taking place in Trinidad and Tobago. But in sharing my experiences with someone else and hearing their experience, that kind of gave me the confidence to be able to talk about it openly.
I would tell them that for their own sake, they need to, because it really damages you if you let all of that time pass and you say nothing. And it's important that you say something as soon as possible to help yourself to heal.
I would tell them that it would be best to speak up. It'd be best to find someone that you trust and let them know what's going on, because at the end of the day, you have to be protected. You shouldn't worry about whether they believe you or not, because you are the number one person that's supposed to be saying about yourself. So find someone who will listen to you, find somebody who can help you, and let them know your story. Because keeping silent will only cause the problem to continue.
So in terms of talking about trauma, sometimes people realize the benefit of sharing their experiences actually for other people who may be still struggling with it. So certainly when we have support groups, it's very helpful to have some individuals in the group that are willing to come and talk about their experiences and perhaps share what helped them, recover. And so it really inspires people who are really struggling that yes, sort of there is life after, and I see how this person got their life back together, and I feel like I can do that for the first time.
It is okay to say something. It is okay to talk about your experiences. Rape, however, it's not okay.